Well, welcome to the podcast today. My name is Jeff, and I'll be your host. And our guest today is Dr. Dan Bahat. Dr. Dan Bahat is one of Israel's leading archaeologists and the former Jerusalem District Archaeologist. He's had a long and highly respected career in the field of archaeology and has written several publications and papers on the topic. He's especially recognized for his excavations in Jerusalem, and in particular, the Western Wall tunnels. He's featured on our First Century Foundations television show, season 9, episode 9, where I had the honor of exploring the Western Wall tunnels with him. And Dan has appeared on many programs prior to my coming to First Century Foundations as well. Dan, welcome to the podcast today.
Thank you very much. Good day.
Well, it's great to have you with us. And we were commenting earlier, that we have interviewed you in a lot of situations specific to archaeological sites. But today would be good just to get to know who you are just a little bit more. I was reading earlier your long list of accomplishments and education and so on. And first, let me just say, I'm really honored even just to be speaking with you today, but also honored to have had the opportunity to be in your home and share a meal with you. It's just great. So just tell us a bit about yourself. When did your family first come to live in Israel?
Well, I'm a descendant, if so to say, of a Zionistic family, which means my father and my mother, who were coming from completely different backgrounds, both of them from Poland, which to date is Ukraine actually. And my father comes from an ultra-Orthodox family, but he rebelled against it, and he decided to go to Palestine then. That's how it was named then, to Palestine. And he did so as a young boy of 17, all by himself. Imagine a boy of 17, and immediately when he got here, he started to do all what the pioneers did then, drying swamps, making roads, and everything which was necessary. Of course, he was contaminated with malaria a few times. And once it was so serious that everybody told him, go back to your country, to your family, I mean, in Poland. And there he met my mother, who comes from a completely different family. My mother comes from a big city, family educated. Her brothers were doctors, lawyers, all kind of a very typical family, completely different. And they fell in love, and he brought her to Palestine because then it was impossible to come just like that. You had to have a good reason why to come, because of the British siege on Palestine, not enabling Jews coming to the country. So my father came to Israel in 1922. My mother came to Israel in 1927. And they suffered a lot, I must say. They suffered a lot. Although both of them came from rich families, they did not want to take anything from home. They said, we are starting new life. This was the idea, starting new life. And they did not want to take anything from home. And they lived very close to the place where my father dried the swamps, which today you won't believe. It is one of the most fertile parts of Israel. It is about halfway between Tel Aviv and Haifa. Today, those swamps are, instead of those swamps, you have today fish ponds of the kibbutzim around. And you don't believe that originally those fish ponds are originally, and why there were marshes and swamps is because the Roman aqueducts, which brought water to Caesarea, which is very close, broke. The water just fell down, spelled, and that's how it became swamps. And people lived with it for centuries, till Zionism started to dry it. And that's how it is today. At any rate,
Wow.
They lived there, and about 2 years before I was born in 1938, they had another child who died of malaria. And therefore, when my mother had to give birth to me, everybody told her, go away from here. It is a dangerous area with malaria. So she went to her parents in Poland, and I was born in Poland. And the interesting thing is that I don't have anything for Poland because, you know, what can I tell you? But the problem is that wherever you read my curriculum, always you have born in Poland as if it is meaningful, because as soon as I was born, already there was, Austria was annexed by Hitler to the German Reich, already started to speak about Czechoslovakia. So my mother understood immediately that the right thing to do is to leave as soon as possible and to go and to nestle under the British wings of Palestine, because that's how situation was. And indeed, short time after I was born, only just to give you an idea of the atmosphere, a month after I was born was the famous Kristallnacht, you know, the night of the broken glass in
Oh,
Berlin,
yes.
Germany. Exactly a month when I was 1 month old.
Wow.
So you can understand why a month later we went to Palestine. So I mentioned the name Palestine. You know, when I say the word Palestine today, it is very difficult for us because Palestine, the Palestinians are the Arabs, which is the wrong thing. It is, oh, sorry. I'm close, just a second.
Yep, no
Because,
problem.
no, that's okay. At any rate, the story is that today there are the Palestinians, and I can say that on my certificate, my birth certificate in Poland, it is written, I'm a Palestinian. That's what it says. The parents are Palestinian because they had already Palestinian citizenship, so I was a Palestinian. Palestinian child. You know, people ask me today, don't you want to have today a Polish passport? I say, first of all, I cannot get it because I'm not Polish. I've got nothing to do with Poland. But, but on the other hand, I must say that sometimes my parents when they used to speak between themselves, because they come from a bit different background, my father used to speak to my mother. Both of them spoke very good Hebrew, of course, which they learned from us, from the children. This was very typical. My father, who came from an ultra-Orthodox family, he knew the Hebrew from prayer books and things. My mother, not at all. And so when they spoke between themselves, they spoke Hebrew, but sometimes my father will speak Yiddish, which my mother didn't know, and she will answer him in Polish. That's how, I'm telling it just to give the background of the house I was born in. And due to this, but when they wanted to say, something which I will not understand, they spoke between the two of them. My father was very gifted with languages. He spoke beautiful English, by the way, because during the Second World War, you know, I don't know if you know that Palestine was a center of supplies to the British Army during the war in North Africa against Rommel. Because it is, the British were so, we say they really betrayed us, because the only element to whom they could trust in the Middle East were the Jews of Palestine. If you think about it, Syria and Lebanon was under Vichy, which was the Vichy government, which was Nazi. In Iraq, there was the famous Nazi rebellion of Rashid Ali. I don't know if people are aware of it. Egypt was a group, the entire Egyptian army was pro-Nazi because they believed that if the Nazis conquer Egypt, and remember, they were already in El Alamein, which is inside Egypt already, they were sure that they will relieve them of the British yoke. So they were all pro-Nazis. In Palestine, the Arabs were with the Jerusalem Mufti, who was associated to Hitler too. And they also saw the Nazis as their redeemer from the British. So the only ones whom the British could trust were Jews. So they took many people who lived in the country, like my father, and he worked in a supply base in Gaza. That was because they were very close. They wanted to be as close as Egypt because all what they needed was for the war in North Africa, in Egypt and Libya of today. So at any rate, that's my father spoke very good English because of that. So this is what it was there. And so this was our home. It was my parents moved to Tel Aviv. We moved to Tel Aviv. A short time afterwards, my sister was born. And actually, we are the two of us. My sister is younger than me in 6 years. Because again, people don't know about it. There was a cessation of birth giving in Palestine amongst the Jews when the Nazis were approaching. Women even committed abortions because everybody was afraid tomorrow the Nazis will be here, and to have children around, babies around is not the right thing to do. The situation was very serious and people are not aware of it, how it was. My mother was the only courageous woman, and she gave birth to my sister. She was born in 44, which was, you can imagine, it was still, the war was not over. It was already, everybody knew that Germany will lose, but the war had to go another half a year or more to So that's it.
Wow.
I went typically to school in Israel, very good school. Schools were very good. The area I live in Tel Aviv was surrounded by good schools. And I went to school. In Israel, it was, first of all, 8 years primary school, and then 4 years in secondary school. When I was about 12, I joined the Boy Scouts. I've been in the Boy Scouts, which was a youth movement. In Israel, it was a very, how will I say, it was a kind of bon ton to be in a youth movement. And we did all kinds of outings and things. And I started to have a hobby. I started to have music as hobby, classical music, at a very young age, because of my mother, by the way. Again, the fact that she came from a big city with an educated family, also this had its impression. And at any rate, so I started to listen a lot to music. I was very good in music. I started to play the piano and so on. And my dream was to be a conductor of an orchestra. That's what I meant to be. And I used to sit for hours reading scores of orchestral music. And I loved it. And I still love it today. I work all the time with music. All the time I work with music. And the end of the story was when I finished high school, I went to the army, as everybody here. And from the outings, I realized that the element in nature, which I like more than anything, were ruins. Not other people like vegetation, animals, insects, everybody found his own. I liked ruins. And I say to myself, one day I'll know myself what it is. I will not need to read books to tell me what it is. And then slowly, I left aside music, which is still my hobby today. And I went to archaeology. I decided to study archaeology. Unfortunately, there was no university in Tel Aviv. I say unfortunately, although later it will be exactly the opposite, because the only university at that time, which was in 1958, the only university in Israel was in Jerusalem, the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. So I had to go and live in Jerusalem, which I hated first years. Because coming from Tel Aviv, I didn't know how cold the winters are in Jerusalem. And when I rented a room with a friend, we lived 2 boys in a room, we lived without central heating. I didn't know that it was necessary. I was not used to it because in Tel Aviv it did not exist. Today, things change. Today, even in Tel Aviv, because of the more luxurious standard, I will say, also in Tel Aviv, they make all kind of central heating under the floor and all kind of things. But I suffered in Jerusalem terribly. Second year in university, I started to study, I studied general history and archaeology, but I realized that to study general history when you have to study Latin and Greek and all those kind of things doesn't go with archaeology when you have to go to excavations and so on. And every every few months, your study is interrupted. You cannot go on. So I choose Jewish history, which is much easier. The requirements are not foreign languages, only English, of course. And this is actually what I did, Jewish history and archaeology, because in Israel you have to do two topics for the study. And then, but more and more I was an archaeologist. More and more I went out. I loved to dig, and I did a lot of excavations. I was considered to be a good archaeologist, so everybody wanted me to join him to digs. And so the highlight was I was asked by the late Professor Archaeology to join Masada. And I was still the youngest of all the other archaeologists there. And they gave me to dig in the section which was considered to be the least complicated. And what came out that it was the most complicated. And I did it well enough. And I've been all those 3 years, we lived in Masada, or at Masada, and this is what I did. And this was open to me a new career of, I was invited all over the country, in kibbutzim and places, to lecture about the new excavations at Masada. And that's how I got this ability to lecture. And the unusual thing is that because of lecturing so much, I somehow developed a very strong voice. And when I come to a medium size hall, I don't need a microphone. Everybody hears me. Yes, I don't
That's
shout.
good.
I learn somehow to speak from the belly, not from the throat. I don't know how it works, but that's how it is.
Yeah.
And so this was actually, Masada started in 63. And we were there in 63, 64, and 65 was the last season. Meanwhile, in 1964, one of my professors, whose name was Michael Aviona, who was a classicist, he built in Jerusalem a model of Jerusalem as it was in the time of Jesus. It was in the Holy Land Hotel, which you know undoubtedly. And I was surprised. I asked him, how do you know how to reconstruct Jerusalem? How do you know? We are completely disconnected. People don't know that there were two Jerusalems then. West Jerusalem in Israel and East Jerusalem in Jordan. And you cannot pass from one to the other. They were completely separated. So he started to explain to me how did he know how to do it and so on. And I fell in love with the topic of Jerusalem. I thought this is what I'm going to do. Although, when it came to my MA thesis in Israel, in order to do your PhD, you have to write an essay or a thesis in the MA, the second grade, and you have to have at least 85 out of 100 in order to go on. If you fail to get 85, you cannot go on with studying. At first, I thought to write my MA thesis was on unfortified settlements, which is actually unfortified cities, unfortified settlements in the Middle Bronze Age, which is about 18th, 17th century BC. If you want to put it in a historical point of view, let's say the period of the patriarchs, if you want. Very interesting, because I excavated such a settlement. And when I came to write my PhD, I had another very interesting topic, which was to show the transition between two periods in Egypt, in pharaonic Egypt. How do they influence the political changes in our country in Palestine? So this was already, I was in touch with the professors, everything started to go well. But meanwhile, I became the district archaeologist of Jerusalem, as you have mentioned. And because already since the model in the Holy Land Hotel, which is now, by the way, in the Israel Museum, Jerusalem was what I dealt with. This was my interest, Jerusalem. And I started to study so much about Jerusalem that the director of the Department of Antiquities said, you are the most adequate person to be the archaeologist of Jerusalem. I knew really so much. It was so well that in 67, the Six-Day War, when Jerusalem was annexed, conquered, as you want to liberate it, as you want to define it, I immediately could guide people in Jerusalem. I knew the city so well theoretically that I walked in the street as if I know them. And it opened again to me contact with Jerusalem. Now I realized that in Hebrew, there is hardly any good literature for people who want to learn something about Jerusalem when they come to visit. So I translated many texts from various languages like English, French, German, so on, to make sources. There is a book which still exists, I have it here, a book which is here, which I wrote it in 67, and it has all kind of sources, starting with Old Testament, New Testament. This was my first acquaintance, by the way, with the New Testament. I didn't know the Gospels till then, but I realized that I need the Gospels in order. They are important to study Jerusalem. And so I started with that. And then, of course, Josephus Flavius and the church fathers and everything. And the last part, which is there, is General Allenby's declaration on Jerusalem when the British conquered Palestine in 1917. So I have it there. And so I felt that Jerusalem is my field. That's how it started. And I tried more and more, if I had to dig in Jerusalem and not outside, to know it even through excavating and doing things. And that's how it was. I started to write many papers about Jerusalem, which I still do today. Actually, although I'm retired already for a long time, I'm still writing. Actually, I published recently a book which has been great success, the Temple Mount. The Temple Mount. Why is it important? Because I realized through the studies that whenever somebody goes to the Temple Mount today, people know nothing about it. They always go to look for the temple. And the amount of literature on the temple is so great. Everybody knows the temple, and the question is if this cistern in the temple I speak, in the temple is here or there, or this court is here, or you enter it. If you speak about the beautiful gate, how will the Jews call the beautiful gate? And always, things which are connected with the temple. But I realized that one thing is lacking, the Temple Mount itself. When you go to the Temple Mount today, you see the mosques, you see so many buildings, you see the whole facade, western facade of the Temple Mount, which dates from the Mamluk period, 14th, 15th century. People don't have the slightest idea with it. And moreover, there's not even one single book about it in Hebrew. Imagine, if I tell you, you won't believe it. So I decided to write a book about the Temple Mount, not the temple, and I emphasize it all the time. I'm not discussing the temple. I'm discussing the Temple Mount, its development, the beauty, the problems, sources which describe it, and so on and so forth. It is now being translated into English, and actually what I'm busy these very days is every chapter, when the translator is finishing, I sit and check it. So now I'm checking, we reached already the Mamluk period. We'll have only the Ottomans, the Turks, and it is finished. And then it will be, I think that this year it will be already published in English as well.
Wow.
At
That's
any rate,
amazing.
yes, at any rate, the interesting thing is that there's still a lot to be written about Jerusalem. And in a way that maybe I'm saying something which I would not say but still I think about it. There is a whole young generation of archaeologists who deal with Jerusalem. And every year there are seminars of Jerusalem, on Jerusalem, everything. Usually I don't participate because I don't have patience, but no, I'll tell you why. The young people had to strive for a position in the field. And sometimes they say things which are not, don't have any real foundation and so on. And I'm sick of it. I don't like it. And or what the other thing they do, instead of writing researches, what they do, they publish through those, they describe excavations they did. And there's a lot of dig going on in Jerusalem.
Hmm.
Unfortunately, today, it is because the people who have the money for excavations are Zionist Americans. Zionist Americans. You know, when they speak about Zionists, people always say, what is a Zionist? Mr. A gives money to Mr. B to send Mr. C to Israel. This is a Zionist, you see? So they give a lot of money, although in that there's always also a great change. When I started to publish the book, I had to pay for the publication. That's how it goes when you do scientific books. And there was enough, I got enough money to do it. And the thing is that slowly, the old generation of Jews who live in the diaspora, for whom the existence of Israel is a miracle, therefore they're happy to invest and give money and help and do things. For the younger generation, the sons who own all the factories and all the big businesses from which we got the money, therefore and remember that archaeology is what we say begging. It is begging because the only way to get money is by begging. And the second generation, for them, Israel is already understood for itself. So no, not to bother to help, to support, to do things. So that's how the things are today. So it's not so easy. And really I encounter a lot of problems trying to get. I'll tell you what, just to give you an example, for the translation, I need $5,000, $5,000, and I cannot find it. Imagine, that's how the situation is today. Fortunately, I've got some funds from which I kept from another book, so I can pay it. But otherwise, impossible, impossible. That's how the situation is. Now, when I go further, so that's what it is. I'm now writing a lot, as I say. I started now a new book on Crusader Jerusalem, because I forgot, I skipped something very important. As I said, when I had to write a PhD, I planned to write something about transition from one period to the other in Pharaonic Egypt and how it is reflected in the archaeology in our country. But one day, I was already a district archaeologist, I walked in the Muslim quarter and I entered to a shop of somebody, an Arab who produced metal furniture, you know, for the outside, like chairs, thing.
Mm-hmm.
When I got to his shop, you know, amongst all the junk and everything which was there, I looked around and I say, my goodness, I am in a Crusader church. I am in a Crusader church. Indeed, it was an intact Crusader church, intact. And the result of which was that I decided to write about it, to look what was the name of the church in the Crusader period and so on. And when I wrote, I found out that since the 1920s, no one has ever written about Crusader Jerusalem at all. The British who were in Palestine, and they, in order to maintain the Crusader tradition, excavated few places in Jerusalem, like the Citadel, which I'll tell you, I've got also a part in it, the Citadel and Damascus Gate. And that's how it was. Otherwise, they did not do anything in Jerusalem.
Hmm.
No, that's amazing. And so then I decided to do my PhD on the Crusaders. And as you understand, I was archaeologist of the Bronze Age, of the Iron Age, not of Crusader, which is medieval. But then I decided I was already enough known in Jerusalem because people knew me already. And I went to the professor who was #1 on Crusaders in the country. He was such a person that he was a member of the Immortals in France, you know, the French Academy. They called the members of the French Academy, they called them the Immortals. He was one of them because his contribution to the French presence in the Middle East in the medieval era, Crusader and so on, was #1. So I decided he will be my tutor. I went to him and I asked him if he will be willing to accept me as his student. He says yes, under one condition. What is the condition? That you study Latin. I said, Latin? Latin is not a problem. After French, Italian, and Spanish, I won't have any problem with Latin. And indeed, that it was after half a year, I passed an exam to show that I know enough Latin to read texts. And that's how it happens. And I remember that I told you when I started to study, I didn't study general history because I didn't want to study Latin. I knew I won't make it. So here it is. It came back. Yes,
Yeah.
after years, but it came back. And that's how it was. So this was my PhD. Now I'm changing it into a book. This is what I'm doing now. I'm changing. This will be my next book because I see that although so much was written and so many years have passed, still basically there's not great change. Basically, there's no great change. So that's what I did. But in 1990, I decided to leave because of changes, administrative changes in the Department of Antiquities in archaeology in Israel. I decided to leave the system and to go to academic life, which was very easy for me, really to change, because anyhow, I was known already as a researcher and a scholar in spite of the fact that I had an administrative job for which I got many prizes and things and so on. And so I went to the university, to Bar Ilan University, which was the university which was willing with me to make a center for the study of Jerusalem. So that's, they wanted to do it. First, I offered it to Jerusalem, but Jerusalem was reluctant. They said, we teach Jerusalem in geography, and we teach Jerusalem in archaeology, and we teach in history. We don't need a special institution for that, a kind of an institute. So I said, okay, I'll find another university, and I went to Bar Ilan. I taught there till I had to retire. Then comes another chapter in my life when in 2001, when I retired from there, I started to teach in Toronto. As you remember, I used to teach 13 years, from 2001 to 2013. I taught there, but my career, and then I had to leave again because of age and things. But teaching didn't stop me. And actually, till the beginning of the corona, of this COVID, I taught in Switzerland. I continue to teach in Switzerland, always faculty of theology, because what I like is to show that archaeology, the importance of the country to the general world is because of the religious values, the holy sites, the holy places, the Old Testament, Quran, Torah, and so on. So I used to teach in the faculties of theology where I could always combine archaeology with theology and church fathers and things and all those kind of things. And I love it. So that was my first encounter with Canada, which you can still see in my room. Everything is all the provinces of Canada are there, and even the territories, all everything
Yes.
is. I'll show you just one thing, which you might laugh, what I have on my desk. When you see it, you won't believe it. It is on my desk.
Aha, the Toronto Transit Commission.
Exactly.
Yeah. Did you did you ride did you ride a subway or two when you were in Toronto?
The only means of transportation I used was that
Yeah,
TCC.
yeah. That's
The
amazing.
TCC. Yes, you see, so, but I'll tell you what, every such experience, made me look at open the world. The
Yeah.
one thing which I cannot say about myself is I'm not a provincial person. I've got open things, and that's not the end of my career, international career. Then what happens was, when I finished with Canada, um, in Canada, of course, I used to write. Actually, I did my PhD in Toronto. When I sat in Toronto, every year when I went back to Israel, I gave another chapter for judgment, and that's how it was. And but remember my story with music. It never left
Yeah.
me. All the years I'm with music. And now came a story. One day I went to Italy because I loved Italy because the same professor who showed me Jerusalem through the model he made, the first year when I started in the university, he taught us the mosaics of Ravenna in Italy, which are beautiful. And then I said, I must go and see it. And I went to Italy, not knowing one word in Italy, not knowing anything, all by myself. I went on a boat, sleeping on top with a sleeping bag for $50. That is what it was, with hardly any money because you could not take out money from Israel. That's how it was. Israel was in a
Okay.
shortage of foreign currency. And I went to Ravenna. I used all the visit there, which I did for about 3 weeks, using one word in Italian, which I know, which was this, questo, this. Because I went to a shop to buy food. I said this and this and this and this. That's how it was. I came back to Israel and I bought a dictionary, Italian dictionary and conversation book or something like that. And I started to study, but this was not the end of the story. When we excavated Masada, my part, as I said, was the most interesting one. And in my part, for the first time, we found frescoes. We didn't know what to do with frescoes. So we asked UNESCO to send us an expert on frescoes to show us how to dig them and how to preserve them, because otherwise, with the hammer, when you walk close to it, it will collapse like powder. So an Italian came, and as typical to Italians, didn't know one word besides Italian. No one knew how to speak to him. Now, his story is also very, very funny. When he came to us, he was in the middle of doing restoration of a church in Rome, which is called St. Andrew in the Valley, Sant'Andrea della Valle in Italian. I don't know if you know, but Sant'Andrea della Valle, in this church, it is the first act in the opera Tosca of Puccini takes place in this church. So I
Oh,
fell in love with the church, not only because Luciano, this was his name, but also the church as a background to an opera which I love. Very funny. And you see how things are always. And because of Luciano, this Italian who was with us, I started to speak to him. Again, more than one word, 2 words, 3 words, 4 words. And slowly, slowly, he has been with us for about 6 weeks. When he left, I was already to speak a light language in Italian. When we finished Masada, and I started to, when I went already, to normal life, I still kept reading the dictionary, a dictionary in Italian, a dictionary. And I realized that it's a language I should speak. Today I speak Italian fluently, number two after English, I think. Not the same level as English, but almost like English.
Hmm.
And I love the language. And later I joined a group of Israelis in Jerusalem who love Italy, and I'm one of them. And so I became a member. It was called the Association of Friendship Israel-Italy. And slowly, because I became the president, the chairman. And I did a lot for relations with Italy. I brought artists from Italy to do this. I helped to get scholarship for Israelis who wanted to study in Italy. And so it was, but unfortunately, some years later, this association fell apart. People were busy, didn't want to be busy with it and so on. And I felt somehow that there is no use to continue only by myself. I was the only one who was really insisting.
Hmm.
And as something which I'm very proud of is that I became a knight in the order of honor of Italy. And this is something very unusual. I'm a knight. Whenever the annual festivities, the Day of Independence of Italy, I go to the embassy with all those things around. Very, very funny. No, it's a nice token of appreciation and so on.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
now I'm a president of there is an association in Italy, which exists also in Canada, which is called Dante Alighieri, after the famous poet. And this organization is made for the diffusion of Italian culture and language. So again, I became a member, and now I'm the president in Israel. We are doing a lot. We are teaching people Italian. We've got courses in Italian. We do public lectures and things all about. So I became a friend of the consul general with the ambassador. I'm very, very much involved in that. Also, when I taught in Switzerland, I taught in the Italian-speaking part of Switzerland, of course, in Italian. Then I was invited by the Polish Pope for an audience, which was very, very unusual for Israeli then.
Mm-hmm.
Now there's some more people who are, the Pope is more open, but then it was, to meet the Pope was something completely crazy. I had a long audience with him. And it started by being, yes, usually every Wednesday, I don't know if you know, people are going to, there is a big hall in the Vatican, and people, who want to see the Pope from close, not from the piazza part, but from there, are sitting there. Now, the Pope decided to write books on holy cities. The first one was on Moscow, because Moscow is considered to be the third Rome. After Rome and Constantinople, Istanbul of today, and Moscow, this is a holy city to the Muscovians, to the Pravoslavs and so on. So next, of course, was Jerusalem. And then you had a problem, who will write it? Because in Jerusalem, it is a problem. A Jew should write it. And what about the Christian and the Muslims? So here in Rome, very typical to politically correctness of the Vatican, he asked 3 people to write, a Jew, a Muslim, and a Christian. He imposed it on the Christian to find the Jews. Of course, it was a Dominican father whom I knew very well. I did with him some films on Jerusalem. So I was the Jew, and I found a friend of mine who was a Muslim sheikh, a Muslim judge, and so on. So all the three of us went. When we had this meeting in the big hall, we stood on the side because the publishing house of the Vatican, who published the book, which came out very beautiful, they arranged for us to stand on the side. The Pope will come and say hello to you. And here is a funny thing. When he got to me, he shook hands, everybody shook hands. I asked my mother, what do you think when the Pope comes to me? What should I do? Should I bow? No, I'm Jewish. Because others, the Christian, of course, kissed his hand. I will not do it. And when he came to me, I told him in Polish, which I knew because it was the secret language of my parents.
Mhm.
I told him, for me, it is closing a ring, because we both come from the first, I was born in the same area in Poland from which you are coming. And moreover, some of your friends from school, I know very well in Israel, all of them ask me to greet you. He says, this I cannot bear. We have to go and sit together. And after the audience, the general audience, his cardinals and people came and led me to his private room. And we had an audience of over an hour, which is very unusual. And he asked me about the Christian archaeology of Jerusalem, altogether what I think, the authenticity of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, all kind of. This was a great experience, which I still cherish today. Because this was, look, for a young Israeli man, boy who comes from Tel Aviv, and to meet the Pope, not a diplomat, not a minister, not a prime minister, and just a simple person to meet him. And so this was a very important event in my life, I must say, although it was in 88. So many years have passed, and still. When I finished my job in Jerusalem, I finished in such a way, I always say that in a place like Jerusalem, Jews, Muslims, Orthodox, Christians, all kinds of Christians, it is like to go in heavy rain. The idea is that if you're doing well, you come out of this very rain very dry. And that's what happened to me. So the mayor of Jerusalem, the legendary mayor of Jerusalem, Teddy Kollek, I don't know if the name means to you anything. He was really a legendary person. He was the mayor of Jerusalem during the unification of Jerusalem. And he did marvelous work in order to smooth the discrepancies and things. So I got from him the Jerusalem Prize of Archaeology, which was a very, very honorable thing. Of all the people who got it from here, I'm the only one who is still on this side of the earth. All of them
Wow.
already died, yes. But it happens to me everywhere. And now I want to tell you, for example, a friend of ours who is close to 99 now, the Israel Museum had to do the day before yesterday a great meeting for her 90th birthday. They asked me to speak, and I wonder, why do you ask me? I was not specially a friend of her or anything, because only 3 of us are left of those who started in Department of Antiquities. It was in Shlomo Melech Street, and then in 64, the Israel Museum opened, so we moved to the Israel Museum. And then in 67, we moved to Rockefeller Museum. Only 3 of us are around here. One is already completed in Mentic, so it could not be done. And that's what we have, another friend, myself, and that's it. And everywhere it is like that now, everywhere. From Masada, only from the archaeologists who excavated, only 2 are left. And unfortunately, the other one is in a very bad state, inflicted with a terrible cancer. You see, so that I'm really one of the last to everything. On one hand side, it is very sad. On the other, I'm very proud, that I'm still, and this is because I got When you go to the gym every day and you lift weights and you run and you do, it somehow keeps you better. Somehow keeps you better. Yes, you can never know though. You cannot boast because God has got maybe different plans for you. That's how it is. So this is what is today. So you see, I've got so many occupations. I write, I go to the Italian Association, to the Dante Alighieri Association, and I listen a lot to music and gym every day. Busy, busy man. And that's a good thing. Keep busy and read a lot. Just to give you an idea, today I read, I'm crazy about Italy. I go in every moment I came. Only now, under this corona, this COVID, I've been twice in Italy. It was nuisance because you had to go to pass the PCR and all those kind of things. And terrible, terrible, terrible administrative things, and you get angry because it doesn't work, and one doesn't like the way you checked yourself. All kind of problems. But it was amazing. It was to go again to Italy. Italy, no tourists. Everything was empty. You went to the Colosseum, it was empty. Everywhere it is empty. So good. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And that's what we have. Yes.
Well, I was just going to interrupt for 1 second. I do want you to talk some more. This is supposed to be an interview, but it's hard to interview a lecturer, first of all. And you have. I feel like this is.
I warned you. I warned you on that.
You did. You did.
Yes.
I feel like this is just very special, though, to have you share with us such an amazing synopsis of your career and your life. And I know that a lot of people are going to be interested in hearing this and seeing it. What's one of the major highlights of your archaeological career, the most exciting find that you ever made? Talk to us a little bit about that.
The find which I'm excited more than anything else, when we excavated Masada, I discovered in my section, remember I told you it was considered to be the least important, I found the names of many, many inscribed pieces of pottery, which is called in Greek ostrakon. You know it from ostracizing and so on.
Yes.
And we found 11 private names, including the name of the commander of Masada, about whom we know from Josephus Flavius. And there was a kind of what we call the lethal lottery, when people had to choose 11 people to kill all the other men after all the men killed their families, and then to commit suicide themselves. I think that point of view, historical point of view, that's the greatest thing I've ever found. I never found, very exciting, besides it, a very exciting thing, because what I look more, and this is important for me, is on the when you accumulate all what you do, all your achievement, you can create a picture of a site, of its importance in history and so on. That's for me important. In Jerusalem, for example, I'm much more interested, not so much in the history of Jerusalem, because of the history of Jerusalem, everybody knows. It's not a great thing to know. You know it from the Old Testament, from all the time. I'm interested to know if let's say, a Crusader source will say a church so and so, I want to find the church, or to know at least where it is. See, that's my interest. That's my interest. Yes. So you see, I cannot give you a good answer. What is the best discovery I've ever made? Here and there, I found some exciting things, but nothing which is which highlight my life. Nothing. So I'm publishing here and there small finds from here and there, but not really important.
Yeah. Well, I am always fascinated to go with you into the tunnels underneath the Western Wall. I think that just the explanations of those stones, the Herodian stones, and the sheer size of them, always amaze me.
But you see here also, if you ask me, did you find anything exciting there? No, there were harder pieces of pottery. But the excitement is suddenly you see the Western Wall, you see the big stones. You have to think, where did they come from? Where is the quarry? What is it?
Mhm.
You know that on the Western Wall tunnels, just to give you an idea, which looks like, a nice tour, just to show you. I hope I have it here with me. Look, this book I published. Look how the size of this book. This is about the Western Wall tunnels.
Yeah.
You see, look what a book it is. And you understand, this is my life. To publish, to write, book, another book. That's what I like. You
Yeah.
see?
Now, just while we're on the topic, and maybe we'll finish up with this question, but in 2016, UNESCO said something about the Temple Mount that there is no Jewish connection to the Temple Mount. As an archaeologist, as someone who has studied and dug there, what's your response to that?
There are idiots all over the world, and sometimes they're concentrated in one place or the other. How can you do it? And you know what surprises me? Look, I want to tell you something. When I speak to Christians, I explain to them, look, when you read Jesus in Jerusalem, all the events which you see in Jerusalem, besides the passion and the crucifixion and resurrection, all what he did in Jerusalem was on the Temple Mount. Chasing out the money changers, walking under Solomon's portico, all kinds of speeches and everything. On why the Temple Mount is not a holy shrine to the Christians? Because of simple reason. When Saladin conquered Jerusalem in the 12th century, he forbade the Christians to come there. You see, Jews and Christians were not allowed to go to the Temple Mount. So what happens is, when the Franciscan friars made the so-called holy places in Jerusalem, there was no use to include the Temple Mount, because anyhow you cannot visit it. And they wanted people to see more and more holy places. So that was it. You
Mhm.
see, but a Christian country, a Catholic country like Italy, Spain, France, how could you give your hand to the idea that the Temple Mount does not have Jewish connection? All your religion is based on that. You see?
Yeah.
So how can you explain it? Politics, politics. In the share of the United Nations, Israel has got one share, and the Arabs have got 51, so they win. But morals, look, the League of Nations collapsed because there was, the League of Nations collapsed. The end of the League of Nations started when Mussolini invaded Ethiopia, and they did not protest. And if I tell you that the three candidates to the Nobel Prize for Peace in 1938, now sit well, were Hitler and Mussolini. You understand, this world is crazy.
This
Imagine
world is
candidates.
crazy.
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
you see. So I'm not surprised. Look, they've got the Committee of Human Rights. Committee of Human Rights in the United Nations. Who is the chairman? Iran. And who are the members? North Korea, one of the members. So what do you expect? I don't have
Yeah.
any expectation from anything. So that's
Well,
all. That's it. That's it.
Well, listen, I have learned so much today. It's been great to just listen to you talk about your life and your experiences. Appreciate your time. And
Thank you.
I've also learned that the next time I come for dinner, you're going to have to play the piano for me, because I didn't know you played the piano. And now, is there a certain term I should address you by to recognize your knighthood? Do I need to call you, Sir Dan Bahat or anything like that? No.
You're making a joke out of me.
Well,
Yeah.
thank you so much, and
Okay.
this has been fantastic. It's been great to have you with us.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thanks for watching. You can listen to this entire podcast on your favorite audio podcast platform. Find the link below. And while you're at it, don't forget to click subscribe and follow us on Facebook so you can stay connected to First Century Foundations.